Yui's back, your eyes catching on the flicker of shadow and light in the corner of your mind, the kind that makes you second-guess whether you left a lamp on or if some ancient god just decided to mess with you. This is where it begins, not the classroom version with tidy charts of Olympian family trees, but the messier, stranger, sometimes darker version of Greek myths. The one no teacher ever put on a projector because, well, you probably wouldn't survive it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and your local time. I always love seeing who's awake when the myths start to whisper. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander through a hall you recognize and yet don't. The old marble columns rise above you, cracked with age, but the voices echoing between them are not the polite retellings you heard in school. Instead, you hear fragments, half-truths, missing pages, names spoken like secrets. There's the familiar pantheon, sure, Zeus hurling thunderbolts like a child flinging tantrums, Athena with her calm strategic smile, Poseidon smashing waves in an eternal bad mood. But in the shadows of their stories are others, figures with voices that never quite reached the textbooks. Your teacher may have once told you that Greek myth is neat and linear, chaos is Gaia, Uranus, Titans, Olympians, heroes. Simple. But as you walk further, you see the cracks in that narrative. The Greeks themselves didn't always agree on their own myths. One city swore by a tale, another rejected it entirely, and poets rewrote divine scandals to fit the mood of their audience. Scholars still argue whether myth was ever meant as religion, entertainment, or coded history. The truth? It's all of them, tangled. Take the earth itself, Gaia. You probably remember her as the calm grandmother of all life, the starting point. But that's only the sanitized version. The older fragments tell you she wasn't passive. She raged against her own children, punished them, swallowed them in stone. It's as if the earth under your feet holds grudges no textbook dared to mention. Odd, isn't it, how schools skipped the part where the ground itself could be vengeful? A marble statue tips ever so slightly as you pass, its face broken. You hear whispers of names not often spoken, Nyx, the primordial night, Hecate, the goddess of thresholds, Eris, who laughed at the downfall of heroes. These are the figures the main story often erases, the way a family hides embarrassing relatives when company comes over. Yet they matter. They shaped myth in the same way shadows shape the edge of light. Your steps echo across the hall, and you pause at a painted vase, its surface chipped but still holding a tale. The scene is familiar, Zeus seated on a throne, but there's a detail you never noticed. A woman beside him, faceless, her name rubbed out by time. She could be Dione, or Themis, or Metis swallowed whole before Athena was born. It's a reminder that for every famous myth, there's another, lost or suppressed, hiding just behind the curtain. The oddest part? Even the ancients weren't consistent. Imagine a classroom debate, but stretched across centuries. Was Hades cruel or simply fair? Was Hera jealous or protecting cosmic balance? Was Prometheus a hero or a reckless criminal? Scholars still argue whether these contradictions were intentional. Did the Greeks enjoy chaos, or were they just really bad at editing? You lean against a cool column, and for a moment the silence feels heavy, like you've stumbled into a backstage of history where the actors dropped their masks. The myths you grew up with were the highlight reel. But behind them is a darker, stranger, more human set of stories, messy gods who cheat, mortals who outwit them, and forgotten figures erased not because they were unimportant, but because they were too unsettling to teach in daylight. You step deeper, the air thick with the scent of old oil lamps and dust, and you realize, this journey won't just be about stories you haven't heard, it's about learning to see the cracks in the ones you thought you knew. The forgotten doorway has opened, and you've already walked through. You move forward, your footsteps trailing into a deeper cavern of memory, and suddenly the ground feels alive beneath you. Not in that poetic, Mother Earth is nurturing us kind of way, but in the unsettling sense that something vast and ancient is listening to every step you take. This is Gaia Earth herself, and tonight you're not going to meet her as the kind grandmother of creation. You're about to meet her angry. Most of us only heard the polite version. Gaia gives birth to the titans, the mountains, the seas, all that cozy natural stuff. But what your teacher didn't mention is that she didn't exactly approve of how her husband, Uranus, treated their children. You probably wouldn't either if your kids were locked away inside your own body. Yes, that's right, Uranus stuffed their children, the Cyclopes and the Centimanes, deep inside Gaia, where they squirmed like unspoken grudges. Imagine carrying around not one, not two, but 50-headed giants in your ribcage. Even the Earth can only take so much. So Gaia fought back. She forged a sickle of flint and handed it to her son Cronus, the only one bold enough to accept the job. And in case you missed that in your school books, Cronus castrated his father. That's not a polite myth, that's a cosmic act of revenge that shaped everything afterward. The sea foam from Uranus's, let's say removed parts gave birth to Aphrodite. Talk about an awkward family tree. And here's the detail your textbooks really skipped: Gaia didn't stop there. Even after Cronus took over, she turned on him too. Why? Because he locked away more of her children, refusing to free his siblings. Gaia's grudges stacked up like stones, and she whispered rebellion into the ears of anyone who would listen. She isn't just Mother Earth. She's the mother-in-law nobody survives. Scholars still argue whether Gaia represents the literal Earth or a symbol of rebellion against tyranny. Was she a deity, or simply a way for the Greeks to explain why the ground sometimes shakes in earthquakes? Either way, she's not the passive figure you might imagine when you hear Goddess of the Earth. She's fierce, vindictive, and terrifyingly patient. As you picture her, the floor beneath you trembles, not violently, but like something massive has shifted far below. You remember the quirky little fact that the ancient Greeks believed earthquakes weren't caused by tectonic plates? No, that's our neat modern science, but by imprisoned giants thrashing inside Gaia's belly. That rumble underfoot? That was a monster rolling over in its sleep. You keep walking, and the cavern walls around you look like ribs, curving and jagged, as though you're inside Gaia herself. You imagine her voice rumbling through stone: she never forgives, only bides her time. That's why, centuries later, even after Zeus and the Olympians took over, she sided with the giants during their great rebellion against Olympus. Mother Earth always had her own agenda. It's strange, isn't it, how in school you got the crisp, orderly version: Zeus defeated the Titans, the Olympians ruled forever. But here, you see, the story never really ended. Gaia was always waiting for her chance to rise again. And some myths hint she almost succeeded, whispering to gods and mortals alike until the ground beneath Olympus cracked. You run your fingers over the cavern wall, feeling the grooves worn deep. It's as if countless others have walked this way, all listening to the same story, all realizing that Earth itself can turn traitor. That's the unsettling beauty of Gaia's myth: she isn't just about creation. She's about resistance, rebellion, and the unrelenting memory of wrongs. So next time you feel the ground tremble, maybe don't think of it as just an earthquake. Maybe, just maybe, it's Gaia shifting in her sleep, remembering all the grudges she still holds. You step out of the cavern, and the air changes. The damp heaviness of Gaia's fury gives way to a crossroads, 3 paths stretching ahead of you, each dimly lit by a torch stuck into the ground. You know at once who waits here. She isn't loud like Zeus, or wrathful like Poseidon, or even calculating like Athena. She is quieter, stranger, a whisper at the edge of every shadow. This is Hecate. Now, if you only heard about Hecate in passing, you might think of her as just another side goddess. Maybe your teacher mentioned her in connection with witchcraft, or perhaps she was brushed off entirely. But here, at the crossroad, you see her clearly, torches in both hands, a hound at her side, her eyes glowing faintly with something not quite mortal. Hecate isn't Olympian. She predates them, older than Zeus himself, and yet he respected her enough to grant her a share in both earth and sea, even the underworld. Unlike other deities who were tied to one place, she could move between realms freely. Think of her as the ancient Greek version of someone who has an all-access pass to every backstage, front row, and secret room in existence. The quirky detail? Dogs howling at night were often said to be greeting Hecate as she passed by. Picture that: every neighborhood pup barking at shadows wasn't just being annoying, it was supposedly signaling the goddess walking past your doorstep. As you stand at the center of the crossroads, you feel the weight of choices. That's Hecate's domain: not just witchcraft, not just ghosts, but decisions. Every fork in the road, every threshold crossed, every should I or shouldn't I moment, she's there. And if you've ever woken at midnight, restless, staring at the ceiling while your mind races through impossible decisions, you've probably been in her company without knowing it. Scholars still argue whether Hecate was originally a goddess of fertility and abundance, only later darkened into a figure of witchcraft, or whether she was always cloaked in night. Her worship was surprisingly widespread, especially in households. Families would leave offerings to her at crossroads, cakes of honey, garlic, even small fish, to keep her favor and to keep ghosts away. Imagine having to bake pastries not for grandma but for the goddess who might be hanging around your front porch with a pack of restless spirits. And here's the eerie part, she wasn't feared in the way Hades was. People respected her, even trusted her. She guided souls through the underworld, but she also blessed families with prosperity. She was the liminal goddess, the one who didn't belong to one single box. You lift one of her torches, its flame flickering strangely without smoke. The path ahead seems to blur, twisting and doubling back on itself, but her steady presence keeps you calm. This isn't the sanitized myth from your childhood. This is a reminder that not all power shouts, some power simply waits at the edges, holding the keys to places you're not sure you want to visit. And isn't that what makes her unforgettable? Not the thunder, not the spectacle, but the whisper you can't ignore when you're standing at a crossroads of your own. The torchlight dances on your hands, and for a brief second you think you see three faces staring back at you, Hecate, triple-formed, watching all directions at once. Then the vision fades, and you're left with only the soft hum of night, and the quiet realization that not all forgotten gods were powerless. Some still walk at every crossroad you've ever taken. You step past the crossroads, the torches of Hecate fading behind you, and find yourself in a sunlit clearing. At first it feels like a relief after so much shadow, but then you hear it, a laugh. Not a cruel laugh like Ares on a battlefield, not a regal laugh like Hera when a plan works, but a quick, mischievous snicker, the kind of laugh you hear right before someone pulls the chair out from under you. You don't need an introduction. You know who this is, Hermes. Most people know Hermes as the messenger god, the one with winged sandals, the one sprinting between Olympus and Earth like an overworked postal worker. But before he became Zeus's speedy errand boy, Hermes was, let's say, a handful. And his very first story proves it. According to the hymn written about him, Hermes was born in a cave. And on the very same day, literally hours after birth, he snuck out of his crib, toddled off, and stole Apollo's sacred cattle. Imagine a newborn pulling off a grand theft on day one. That's Hermes for you. He disguised their tracks by making them walk backward, tied branches to his feet to confuse the trail, and then, because why not, he slaughtered a few, cooked the meat, and invented fire-roasted sacrifice. Some babies cry for milk, Hermes basically said, I'm gonna grill tonight. Here's the quirky detail, Hermes also invented the lyre that same day, using a tortoise shell and strings of sheep gut. A newborn, remember. So picture it, he's out here, baby fat still on his cheeks, playing music to charm his way out of punishment. And when Apollo stormed in furious about the stolen cattle, Hermes played innocent, literally. He said, I'm just a baby. I don't even know what cows are. Which, let's be honest, is the best alibi in history. Scholars still argue whether Hermes was originally a trickster spirit adopted into the Olympian family, or if he was always meant to be a god. Either way, he's the line between divine prankster and cosmic hustler. Where Zeus uses brute force, Hermes uses wit. And it worked. Apollo was so charmed by the lyre that he forgave the theft, trading the cattle's loss for the new instrument. Imagine being scammed and then paying the thief because their con was that good. As you walk through the clearing, you notice objects scattered in the grass, a traveler's cloak, a shepherd's staff, a pouch of coins. Hermes is everywhere at once, the god of merchants, of thieves, of messengers, of roads. He guides souls into the underworld but also guards athletes at the starting line. He doesn't pick sides, he picks opportunities. The sun overhead wavers, and you feel for a moment like your pockets are lighter. Hermes has a reputation for that. Even gods had to keep a close eye on him. But it's hard to stay angry at someone who embodies the spark of curiosity, the thrill of cleverness. You can't quite pin him down. One second he's a baby swindling his brother, the next, he's the solemn guide leading souls into Hades. What your classroom left out is how Hermes represents not just speed, but the art of bending rules. He is the loophole, the clever turn, the sly grin that changes the game. Without him, the myths would be heavy, full of only thunder and punishment. With him, they gain humor, unpredictability, proof that even gods needed a trickster to keep things lively. You keep walking, and the laugh echoes again, trailing just behind you, just ahead of you, everywhere at once. Hermes doesn't stay in one place. He never has. The clearing dissolves into a banquet hall, marble floors slick with spilled wine, golden cups abandoned on low tables, and laughter echoing like broken glass. For a moment it feels like a feast, until your gaze catches on the center of the room. There, glimmering with a sickly glow, sits an apple. Not just any apple, it's inscribed with 3 words that changed everything, to the fairest. You hesitate to touch it. After all, this is the apple of Eris, goddess of strife, professional troublemaker, and the original party crasher. If you were taught that the Trojan War started because of Paris and Helen, you only got the surface-level story. The real chaos began because someone didn't get invited to a wedding. Picture it, the grand wedding of Peleus and Thetis, a mortal man and a sea goddess, attended by every Olympian worth their thunder. Every Olympian except Eris. She wasn't on the guest list. Maybe the hosts thought, she causes drama, let's just skip her. Which is funny because leaving her out caused more drama than inviting her ever could. Eris barged in anyway, not with a tantrum but with a gift. She tossed the golden apple into the middle of the celebration, casually inscribed with "to the fairest." That's it. No speeches, no curses. Just one sparkling fruit of chaos. And instantly, 3 goddesses lunged for it: Hera, queen of Olympus; Athena, goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, goddess of love. Here's the quirky detail: none of the men dared to judge. Even Zeus, king of gods, was like, yeah, no thanks. I'm not getting in the middle of that. It's the most relatable thing Zeus ever did. He'd father storms, overthrow titans, but refused to answer the question, who's the prettiest? So the job fell to Paris, a Trojan prince, who might have been regretting ever waking up that morning. Each goddess tried to bribe him. Hera offered kingship over all lands, Athena promised unmatched wisdom and victory in war, and Aphrodite dangled the ultimate prize, the love of the most beautiful mortal woman, Helen of Sparta. And you know the rest. Paris chose Aphrodite, Helen was taken, or ran away, depending on who you ask, and the world burned in 10 years of war. But the untold piece? Eris didn't care who won. She never wanted the apple. She just wanted the fight. Strife itself is her gift, and she knew humans and gods alike can't resist it. The apple was just bait, and everyone took it. Scholars still argue whether Eris represents pure chaos, or whether she's a reflection of how fragile human pride is. Was she malicious, or just holding up a mirror to divine vanity? Either way, the Greeks believed strife was part of life, necessary even. Without it, no stories, no wars, no rise of heroes. With it, disaster, but also change. You circle the table, careful not to step too close to the apple. Its glow seems to pulse, tempting you. For a second, you wonder, what would you choose if it rolled toward you? Power? Wisdom? Love? It's a test you probably wouldn't win, because there is no winning. That's Eris's point. The banquet hall fades, leaving only the echo of laughter and the faint shimmer of gold. And you realize, not every war starts with swords. Some start with a joke, a slight, or one golden apple tossed into the wrong room. The banquet hall melts into darkness, and suddenly you're standing under a sky so deep it feels endless. The stars above shimmer, but they don't comfort you. They feel like eyes, countless, unblinking eyes. And from the shadows, she emerges. Not with thunder or fire, not with a booming declaration, but with silence so complete it drowns out your own thoughts. This is Nyx, goddess of night. You weren't told much about her in school, if she was mentioned at all. Yet in the oldest fragments of Greek myth, Nyx was there before almost everyone else. Before Zeus, before the Titans, before the Olympians carved up the world. She is primordial, born from chaos itself. Imagine a goddess so ancient that even the gods you know bowed to her. There's a story, rarely told, where even mighty Zeus hesitated to cross her. Once, when Hera plotted to destroy Heracles, Zeus grew furious and threatened everyone involved. But when Nyx's name came up, he stopped cold. Even the king of the gods knew, don't pick a fight with night. You can't win against what swallows everything. Here's the quirky detail: the Greeks believed Nyx lived in a cave so vast that one side opened to the daylight and the other to darkness. As the hours passed, she and her daughter Hemera, day, would pass each other in the doorway, one leaving, the other arriving. They never shared the space at the same time, like cosmic roommates who can't stand each other. You step further, and her presence is overwhelming. She doesn't look like the gentle motherly night sky figure you might expect. She's terrifying, endless, with wings as dark as raven feathers and robes that trail like galaxies unraveling. And she is mother, yes, but not of comfort. She gave birth to things the Olympians preferred to forget. Thanatos, death. Hypnos, sleep. The fates themselves, who cut the threads of life. Even Eris, strife, may be her child, depending on which poet you ask. Scholars still argue whether Nyx was worshipped directly or simply feared as an abstract force. Unlike Zeus or Athena, she didn't need temples. She didn't need sacrifices. She simply was. Every nightfall was her temple, every shadow her altar. Worship wasn't necessary, acknowledgement was. The strangest part? Some myths whisper that she existed not only before the Olympians, but that she would remain after them. Eternal night. A reminder that no matter how bright the gods shone, their light would always fade into her darkness. You glance upward again. The stars seem sharper now, cutting into the black, but they don't reassure you. They only remind you of the void behind them. And in the hush of that silence, you sense Nyx watching, patient, knowing that no one escapes night forever. She doesn't threaten, doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. She just waits, and in her waiting you feel the weight of time itself. Every dusk you've ever seen, every midnight you've ever feared, every dream you've ever slipped into. Nyx has been there, always. And when you finally take a step forward, her shadow clings to you like a second skin. You know she won't follow. She doesn't need to. She'll be waiting at the end of the path, like she always has. You leave the suffocating silence of Nyx's presence, stepping into the glow of a forge. Sparks crackle in the air, the clang of hammer on metal echoing like a heartbeat. The heat is intense, but what you feel more than the fire is the bitterness, the sense of rejection hammered into every strike. Here stands Hephaestus, the god they don't usually glamorize. If school mentioned him at all, it was probably in passing, the smith of the gods, maker of their weapons and armor. But that little summary leaves out the cruelty of his story. Unlike the golden, perfect Olympians, Hephaestus was born imperfect. Some myths say he was lame from birth, others that he was crippled after Zeus hurled him from Olympus. Either way, he never fit the mold of the shining, beautiful gods. And here's where the story splits. In one version, Hera bore him alone, without Zeus, to prove she didn't need her husband to create life. When she saw his twisted legs, she was horrified. She cast him down from Olympus, discarding her own son like a broken tool. Imagine the humiliation, your mother, the queen of gods, throwing you away. He landed in the sea, where Thetis and Eurynome, sea goddesses, rescued him. He grew up beneath the waves, crafting wonders in secret. That's the odd, almost tender detail you never hear. The god of fire learned patience and skill in the calm, cool refuge of the ocean. A forge under the sea, hidden, until he was ready to rise again. Later, when Zeus grew angry with Hera, Hephaestus repaid his mother in a peculiar way. He built a golden throne for her, dazzling and flawless. But when she sat on it, invisible chains locked her in place. Not even Zeus could free her. The crippled son had trapped the queen of the gods. That's the kind of petty revenge Greek myth doesn't put on the classroom whiteboard. Scholars still argue whether Hephaestus's lameness was meant to symbolize imperfection, or whether it reflected the respect Greeks had for craftsmen, men who weren't warriors, but whose skill shaped the world. Hephaestus wasn't handsome like Apollo or strong like Ares, but without him, none of them would have armor, weapons, or palaces. His forge literally kept Olympus standing. You notice his creations scattered around you, golden automata, mechanical servants that walk and talk, shields etched with entire histories, blades that gleam with impossible sharpness. Hephaestus made beauty out of bitterness, art out of pain. Every spark that leaps from his hammer is a reminder that rejection didn't break him, it transformed him. And the quirky little fact? When Dionysus finally convinced Hephaestus to return to Olympus, it wasn't by force but with wine. The god of the forge, drunk and staggering, rode back on a donkey, dragging his mother's throne along. The image of a divine smith, tipsy and triumphant, is far from the solemn picture you'd expect of a god. As you watch him work, you realize he's the quiet proof that imperfection doesn't erase power. In fact, sometimes it sharpens it. Every blow of his hammer sings the same truth: you can be broken and still build wonders. The sparks fade, and the forge dims. But the echo of hammer on metal lingers long after, ringing in your chest like a reminder. The forge fades, the hiss of steam and sparks replaced by the distant crash of waves. You find yourself standing on a lonely shoreline, the sand cool beneath your feet, the sea stretching endlessly ahead. A figure sits there, motionless, her hair tangled by salt wind. At first, she looks like a victorious heroine. After all, she helped Theseus escape the labyrinth. But the truth settles in as you watch her shoulders slump. This is Ariadne, abandoned. You probably remember her from the sanitized version. She gives Theseus a ball of thread, helps him slay the Minotaur, and sails away with him. Maybe your teacher even told you they lived happily ever after. Except, no. That's not how the myth ends. The real story is crueler. After escaping Crete together, Theseus stops at the island of Naxos. While Ariadne sleeps, dreaming of a new life with her hero, he abandons her. Just sails away. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. Imagine giving everything for someone, only to wake up alone, the tide washing away his footprints. Scholars still argue why Theseus left her. Some say he was ordered by the gods, others that he simply got bored. Maybe he feared taking her back to Athens because she was a foreign princess. Or maybe, let's be honest, he was just a jerk. Whatever the reason, her story was rewritten for classrooms to protect the heroic shine of Theseus. The part where he strands his lover didn't fit the narrative of a noble hero. Here's the quirky detail: in some versions, Dionysus himself appears after Theseus leaves, claiming Ariadne as his bride. To soften the blow of abandonment, poets gave her a cosmic consolation prize, immortality, marriage to the god of wine, and a crown of stars thrown into the sky. But even then, you can't shake the image of her waking up alone, staring out at the empty sea. The air around you carries that heartbreak. You can almost hear her voice, not screaming, not raging, but quiet disbelief. She gave her loyalty, her cunning, her courage, and what she got was silence. And isn't that the part of Greek myth that feels the most human? Not the monsters or gods, but betrayal that cuts without reason. You walk closer, and she lifts her face to you. There's no anger there, just weariness. You wonder if this is why the Greeks told her story so many different ways, because they didn't know how to sit with the raw cruelty of it. Did they marry her to Dionysus out of guilt, trying to give her a happier ending? Or did they leave her stranded forever, a warning that even the cleverest thread can't untangle human weakness? And then there's the odd, haunting fact: Ariadne's name means most holy. She was connected to ancient fertility cults long before she became a footnote in Theseus's heroics. Perhaps her abandonment wasn't just personal, it was symbolic, the erasure of older goddesses in favor of male-centered hero myths. The waves crash louder. You look back, expecting to see Theseus's ship, but the horizon is empty. Only the sea, endless and cold, keeps her company. You realize that Ariadne's story is one of those cracks in the heroic facade, a reminder that even in myths, love can be fleeting, betrayal ordinary. And as you step away from the shore, her figure grows smaller, but her loneliness lingers like salt on your lips. The waves retreat, the shoreline dissolves, and suddenly you're walking into smoke. The air stings with the sharp tang of ash, and in the distance, a woman's voice rises, part chant, part cry. This is Medea, sorceress, lover, mother, and murderer, depending on which line of the myth you follow. In school, if you heard her name at all, it was probably attached to Jason, the Golden Fleece, and the Argonauts. The story goes, Jason couldn't have one without her. She helped him tame fire-breathing bulls, trick a sleepless dragon, and steal the fleece. She betrayed her own family to do it. That's the part you might have heard. But what happened after? That's the part that textbooks usually skip. Medea didn't just fall for Jason, she burned for him. And when her father, King Aeetes of Colchis, tried to stop their escape, she killed her own brother. Depending on the version, she chopped his body into pieces and scattered them into the sea, forcing her father to stop and gather the remains. That's love, Greek myth style, horrifying, desperate, all-consuming. Here's the quirky detail: Medea wasn't some minor sorceress tagging along. She was the granddaughter of Helios, the sun god. Her power came from blood as well as magic, and she was feared for it. Potions, curses, spells, Medea's name was whispered with awe and dread. In a world where men wrote the myths, she's one of the few women who could bend reality itself. But the real tragedy came later, when Jason abandoned her. After everything she had sacrificed, family, homeland, reputation, he decided to marry another woman, a younger princess, for political gain. You'd think after Ariadne's story you'd be prepared, but betrayal in Greek myth always feels freshly sharp. Scholars still argue whether Medea's next act was meant as horror, justice, or both. In Euripides' famous telling, Medea doesn't just curse Jason's new bride, she kills her, gifting a poisoned dress that bursts into flames. And then, here comes the part that school glossed over: Medea kills her own children. Some versions say she does it to wound Jason, others that the Corinthians killed the children and later blamed Medea. But the enduring image is of a mother, knife in hand, deciding that no one else will take her children from her, not even their father. The stage is filled with smoke, the sound of wailing, the crackle of fire. And in the midst of it, Medea doesn't crumble. She stands tall, defiant, carried away in a chariot drawn by dragons, gifted by her grandfather Helios. That's what makes her so unsettling: she doesn't repent, doesn't beg forgiveness. She leaves Jason shattered and powerless. And here's the odd little fact: in some later myths, Medea ends up in Athens, marrying King Aegeus, father of Theseus. She tries to poison Theseus when he arrives, fearing he'll threaten her children's inheritance. She fails and flees again. Like a shadow slipping between stories, she keeps appearing, always feared, never forgotten. You stand amid the smoke, and for a moment, you understand why the Greeks struggled with her. She is both victim and villain, lover and monster, human and divine. Was she driven mad by betrayal, or was she always destined to burn those around her? Scholars still argue whether Medea represents the dangers of unchecked female power or the terrible cost of being betrayed once too often. The smoke thins, but the echo of her voice lingers, steady and sharp. Love can ignite, but it can also consume. And Medea's fire still burns, centuries later, because it forces you to ask the question nobody wants to face: what would you do if the person you gave everything to tore it all away? The smoke curls away, and suddenly you're not in a burning palace, you're in a sunlit courtyard, where musicians pluck strings and dancers move with effortless grace. At first, it feels peaceful, almost festive. But then you notice the hush beneath the music, the glances exchanged behind painted masks. At the center sits a man crowned with laurel, wine spilling from his cup. Dionysus, god of wine, revelry, and madness. In school, you probably heard his name tossed into lists of Olympians, maybe as the fun one, the party god. Grapes, vineyards, maybe some wild festivals. What rarely gets mentioned is the darker undercurrent, the way Dionysus could dissolve the line between joy and chaos, between liberation and frenzy. He wasn't always welcomed on Olympus. Some myths suggest he had to fight for recognition, his birth doubted, his godhood questioned. Born of Zeus and the mortal Semele, Dionysus was carried to term inside Zeus's thigh after Semele was incinerated by Hera's trick. That detail alone feels strange enough to belong in an anatomy class gone wrong. But it also gave him a liminal nature, not fully divine, not fully mortal, a boundary crosser by design. Here's the quirky fact: in some stories, when Dionysus traveled through foreign lands, he wasn't greeted with open arms. He was resisted, mocked, or even attacked. In one version, King Pentheus of Thebes tried to ban his worship, dismissing the god as a fraud. So Dionysus invited him to see for himself. Disguised as a woman, Pentheus went to spy on the Bakshikrites and was torn apart by his own mother and aunts in their frenzy, convinced he was a lion. That's the kind of bedtime story you never got at school. The dancers swirl around you now, their eyes bright but unfocused, their movements both graceful and unhinged. You feel the pull of it, the sense that one more step, one more glass, and you too could slip into that state where laughter and terror blur. Scholars still argue whether Dionysian rites were about freedom, about women escaping rigid roles, or about the terrifying reminder that civilization itself is fragile. And then comes the softer detail, the part that makes Dionysus not just a god of chaos, but of comfort. He wasn't only about drunken frenzy. He was the god who taught mortals the art of wine, the release of sorrow, the ease of forgetting pain for a little while. His processions weren't just orgies, they were healing in disguise. In fact, he was sometimes called the liberator. But the myths show both faces. The cup could soothe, or it could shatter. The vine could embrace, or it could strangle. And that duality made Dionysus dangerous, not just to kings but to order itself. Which is probably why schoolbooks trimmed him into a smiling grape mascot, safe for children's eyes. You glance at the dancers again, noticing now how close their joy is to hysteria, how their smiles carry a trace of teeth. Dionysus lifts his cup toward you, and the world tilts slightly. The air hums, and you feel that same tension you felt with other hidden myths, the raw edge between the stories you were told and the truths that lingered behind closed doors. The music crescendos. You don't know if you want to join in or run. And that's exactly Dionysus's gift, he doesn't let you stay neutral. You either resist him, or you give in and see where the wildness leads. The music fades, replaced by a hush so heavy it feels like someone is holding their breath. You step forward, and the ground changes beneath your feet, no longer soft earth, but polished stone, cold and echoing. Shadows stretch like fingers, and in the center of the silence stands a figure draped in black. Persephone. You were probably told the child-friendly version. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, picked flowers in a meadow one day, and suddenly boom, Hades snatched her down into the underworld. Eventually, she comes back every spring, which explains the seasons. That's the story written into textbooks, stripped to a neat little cycle. But what you didn't hear was how unsettling the details are, and how Persephone herself is far more than a kidnapped princess. Here's the historical fact: the Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the most important religious rituals in ancient Greece, centered on Persephone and Demeter. For centuries, people gathered in secret to reenact her descent and return, swearing oaths never to reveal the ceremonies. To the Greeks, Persephone wasn't just a symbol of flowers blooming again, she was the very key to death and rebirth, the promise that mortality wasn't the end. But the odd detail is how the myth itself shifts depending on who tells it. In some versions, Persephone isn't a victim. She eats the pomegranate seeds willingly, sealing her tie to Hades because she chooses it. Instead of being dragged, she becomes a queen, a ruler of the dead, equal to her husband. Imagine that, the girl you thought was a pawn actually sitting on a throne, commanding the underworld. Scholars still argue whether her story was meant as a patriarchal justification for abduction, or a coded tale of female empowerment within the darkest realm imaginable. Was she stolen, or did she step across the threshold on her own terms? The air grows cooler as you watch her. She holds a torch in one hand, a pomegranate in the other. Her eyes are calm, unreadable. You realize that even if she was taken, she never left powerless. Persephone became the bridge between worlds. She decides who lingers in shadow and who emerges into light. The quirky fact? Some ancient poets whispered that Persephone wasn't abducted at all, that Demeter herself gave her to Hades as a political marriage. A disturbing family arrangement dressed up as divine destiny. If that's true, the myth isn't about romance or tragedy, but about how even gods treat daughters as bargaining chips. Yet Persephone is never just a victim in these tales. When Orpheus descends to beg for Eurydice, it's Persephone, not Hades, who listens, who shows compassion. She is both darkness and mercy, the silence of the grave and the whisper of return. That duality makes her one of the most layered figures in Greek mythology, though her complexity rarely makes it into the school-friendly version. You take a step closer, and her torchlight flickers across your face. The air smells faintly of iron and earth, like freshly turned soil. She doesn't smile, but there's a steadiness in her gaze that feels oddly comforting. Maybe that's the point. Persephone isn't here to frighten you, she's here to remind you that endings and beginnings are woven together, inseparable. The silence deepens, and the stone floor feels solid under your feet. For a moment, you sense the weight of all those who pass through her realm, and the strange peace she offers them. You blink, and the torchlight dims, leaving only the echo of her presence, quiet but unshakable. The torchlight wavers, and the ground beneath you trembles, not with silence this time but with the thrum of hooves. Dust rises, and you find yourself on a battlefield, banners whipping in the wind. At first, you expect to see Achilles or Hector, the heroes you were told about in school. But instead, a single figure draws your eye, not the strongest, not the most famous, but one whose name rarely makes it onto classroom posters. Penthesilea, Queen of the Amazons. You probably learned a watered-down version of the Amazons, warrior women who lived apart from men, riding horses, wielding bows, symbols of exotic danger. Teachers might have thrown them into a sidebar, almost like a mythological curiosity. But what often got erased is the story of their most tragic warrior, who arrived at Troy with her sisters to fight against the Greeks. Here's the historical fact: the Amazons weren't just fantasy. Archaeologists have uncovered Scythian graves filled with weapons, bows, and horse gear, buried alongside women. Many of them had battle injuries. So while the Greeks spun the Amazons into myth, they were likely drawing on real encounters with nomadic warrior women from the steppes. Penthesilea's story is short but sharp. She fought fiercely at Troy, challenging Achilles himself. And here comes the odd, unsettling detail: according to one version, Achilles killed her in battle only to pull off her helmet and fall in love with her as she lay dying. That moment, caught between hatred and desire, became one of the strangest images in Greek myth. Imagine being so formidable in life that even in death, your enemy can't help but admire you. But not everyone respected her. Another story says that when Achilles gazed at Penthesilea with longing, a fellow Greek mocked him, laughing at the idea of loving a dead Amazon. Achilles, enraged, killed the soldier on the spot. Scholars still argue whether this scene was meant to expose Achilles' hidden vulnerability, or simply to amplify the tragic aura around Penthesilea. And the quirkiest detail? In some retellings, Penthesilea wasn't just fighting for glory, she came to Troy out of guilt. She had accidentally killed her sister during a hunting accident and sought an honorable death in battle as atonement. So when Achilles struck her down, it wasn't just another casualty of war, it was the fulfillment of her own tragic quest. The battlefield around you blurs, the clash of weapons fading into a heartbeat's pause. You see her, tall, proud, her spear raised high. Not a myth to be dismissed, not a curiosity, but a woman who fought on equal ground with the greatest of heroes. And unlike most, she left him shaken, haunted. It's strange, isn't it? School lessons painted the Trojan War as a man's stage: Achilles, Hector, Odysseus. Yet lurking at the edges were women like Penthesilea, who could alter the narrative with a single clash of steel. Her story lingers not because she lived long, but because her death revealed truths even the Greeks couldn't tidy away: that admiration, desire, and grief could all emerge from the point of a spear. You step back from the battlefield, the sound of hooves still echoing faintly. And you wonder, if history remembers her only as the one Achilles loved too late, what else have we lost in the margins of these myths? The battlefield dust settles, and the echo of hooves dissolves into a different kind of stillness, one thick with water. You're standing at the edge of a dark lagoon, the moon rippling on its surface. For a moment, you expect calm, maybe even peace. But then you see her, a woman stepping from the shadows, eyes glinting like a predator's. Her hair snakes and shifts in the faint light, though not literally serpents, at least not yet. This is Medusa. In school, you probably only heard her described as the monster with snakes for hair, the one whose gaze turned men to stone. A quick footnote in Perseus's heroic resume: he cut off her head with the help of Athena's shield, and that was that. But Medusa's story runs deeper, and it's darker than the textbooks ever admitted. Here's the historical fact: in early versions of the myth, Medusa wasn't born a monster. She was once a mortal priestess of Athena, famed for her beauty. But in Ovid's telling, she was raped by Poseidon inside Athena's temple. Instead of punishing Poseidon, the god Athena punished Medusa, transforming her into the Gorgon, cursed so that no one could look upon her without turning to stone. Think about that. The school version boiled her down to bad guy with snake hair, when really she was a victim punished for her violation. Scholars still argue whether Athena's act was meant as cruelty, as a warped kind of protection, or as a way of reclaiming her temple's sanctity. Whatever the intention, the outcome was the same. Medusa became the embodiment of fear, her beauty weaponized against her. And here's the quirky, almost eerie detail: even in death, Medusa's head didn't lose its power. Perseus carried it with him, using it to petrify enemies, until he finally gave it to Athena, who mounted it on her shield. Imagine that: her image became a permanent weapon, wielded by the goddess who cursed her in the first place. But the most haunting part? In some versions, when Perseus severed her head, two children sprang forth from her blood: Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a golden warrior. Out of her violent death, beauty and strength were born. That duality, the monster who creates miracles, makes her more than a villain. She becomes a paradox, forever caught between horror and wonder. You stare at her now, the moonlight trembling across the water. She isn't hissing or lunging, she's watching you, as if daring you to see her not as a monster but as a woman wronged, rewritten, reduced. You realize that the Greeks themselves couldn't decide what she represented. Some painted her face on shields and temples, believing it warded off evil. Others told her story as a cautionary tale, stripping away the nuance until only the beast remained. The odd detail? Ancient artists sometimes portrayed Medusa not as terrifying, but as almost beautiful, serene, her face calm even with snakes coiling around her head. Over time, that image hardened into the grotesque mask we all recognize. Perhaps that's the real tragedy: her humanity erased bit by bit, until she became nothing but a trophy in a hero's tale. The lagoon stirs, and for a moment you see her reflection, flickering, broken, yet undeniably human beneath the curse. You take a step back, the water lapping at your feet, and feel the weight of her story pressing into you. Medusa doesn't ask for sympathy, she demands to be seen, not just as a monster, but as someone who was transformed against her will. The ripples spread wider, and the moonlight fades, leaving only the memory of her gaze, heavy, silent, and unforgettable. The lagoon drains away, leaving you standing on rough stone. The air is heavy with dust, as if it hasn't been stirred in centuries. You hear the faint scrape of claws and the low growl of something waiting in the dark. Then you see her, a shadow with wings stretched wide, eyes burning like coals. This is Lamia. Chances are, you didn't hear her name in school at all. If you did, it might have been as a passing mention, lumped in with monsters of Greek myth. But Lamia's story is far more complicated and far more disturbing than a bedtime tale of a child-eating fiend. Here's the historical fact: Lamia was once said to be a queen of Libya, renowned for her beauty. Zeus fell in love with her, which, in Greek myth, almost always spelled doom for the woman involved. Hera, furious at yet another of her husband's affairs, unleashed her vengeance, not on Zeus, of course, but on Lamia. And here's the cruel, odd detail: Hera killed Lamia's children and cursed her so she would never know peace. Some versions say Hera drove her mad, forcing her to hunt and devour children, both her own and others. In some myths, Lamia's eyelids were cursed never to close, condemning her to eternal wakefulness. Imagine never being able to shut your eyes, never being allowed even the escape of sleep. Over time, Lamia became less queen and more cautionary tale. The Greeks whispered that she prowled the night, snatching children from their beds. Mothers used her name like a threat, the way modern parents might mention the boogeyman. Yet beneath the monstrous reputation still lingers the memory of a grieving woman, driven to cruelty by divine punishment. Scholars still argue whether Lamia was originally a goddess or a mortal turned into myth. Some suggest she was a sea spirit, her story twisted over generations into horror. Others think she was part of an older, darker cult tradition, reshaped by the Greeks into a morality tale. The quirky detail? In certain versions, Lamia could remove her eyes and put them back in whenever she wished, like some eerie mythological toy. Later writers even portrayed her as a vampire-like seductress, preying on young men instead of children. Her image was never stable, it kept shifting with the fears of the culture telling her story. Now she stands before you, half queen, half monster. Her body flickers in and out of shape, sometimes beautiful, sometimes grotesque, as though you're seeing all the versions of her at once. There's anger in her eyes, but beneath it, grief. You feel it pressing against you, a reminder that myths often bury sorrow beneath layers of fear. The stone floor beneath your feet vibrates with her growl, though she doesn't move closer. Instead, she lingers in the shadows, letting you decide whether to see her as nightmare or tragedy. And maybe that's the power of Lamia's myth. She forces you to confront how easily grief can be twisted into monstrosity when gods, or people, decide to punish instead of heal. The growl softens, fading into silence, and the shadows close back in. You blink, and the queen, the monster, the mother, all are gone. Only the dust remains, heavy in your lungs, reminding you that every myth has a cost, and Lamia's was paid in endless sleepless sorrow. The dust thins, and the darkness shifts into something colder, cavern walls stretching high, dripping with water that echoes like distant bells. The air tastes metallic, and ahead you see a figure sitting silently by a rock, her face pale and worn. At first, she looks like a shadow, but as you step closer, you recognize her, Cassandra of Troy. Her name might have flickered across your school lessons, usually in one line, the prophetess no one believed. A tragic side note in the Trojan War, eclipsed by the grandeur of Hector, Achilles, or the wooden horse. But Cassandra's untold story is one of the most piercing in all of Greek myth. Here's the historical fact: Cassandra was the daughter of Priam, king of Troy, and was granted the gift of prophecy by Apollo. She could see the future with perfect clarity. But when she refused Apollo's advances, he cursed her. Not by taking her visions away, but by ensuring that no one would ever believe her. Imagine that. You can see the future, but every time you speak it aloud, people laugh, dismiss, or ignore you. The war comes, the warnings pile up, and still, nothing. A punishment not of silence, but of futility. The quirky detail: Cassandra warned against bringing the wooden horse into Troy. She shouted, raged, begged, but her own family silenced her, dismissing her words as madness. The irony is brutal: she was right, but the curse ensured that her truth could never change anything. You watch her now, her hands clenched, her eyes wide with knowledge she cannot share. There's no fire in her expression, only exhaustion. She's lived every tragedy twice, once in foresight, once in reality. And that weight is heavier than any spear. Scholars still argue whether Cassandra was a victim of divine cruelty, or whether her myth was crafted as a warning about women speaking truth in a world that didn't want to hear them. Was she a madwoman to the Greeks, or a mirror showing how society itself refuses inconvenient truths? And here's the odd little twist: after Troy fell, Cassandra was dragged away as a spoil of war, taken by Agamemnon. She foresaw his murder at the hands of his wife, Clytemnestra, and her own death alongside him. She even said it aloud, calmly, as if announcing the weather. But again, no one believed her. She walked straight into her doom, unflinching. The cavern echoes with her silence, the dripping water almost like a clock ticking down. You want to tell her you believe her, even now, centuries later? But she doesn't look at you. Her gaze is fixed far ahead, as if seeing something you can't. Perhaps she's watching a future that still hasn't arrived. And you realize, Cassandra's myth isn't just about Troy. It's about every time someone speaks truth that the world refuses to hear, every ignored warning, every silenced voice. That's why she still lingers, not in textbooks, but in the uneasy corners of memory. The cavern trembles slightly, and the vision fades. Cassandra remains seated, her face pale in the shadows, her story echoing long after she is gone. The cavern's echo softens until it's nothing more than a faint hum in the back of your mind. The sharp edges of prophecy, betrayal, and grief begin to fade, like smoke dispersing into open air. You feel yourself stepping away from the myths, out of the dust and the shadows, and into something gentler, something that feels almost like twilight. The air is cooler here, but not heavy. It brushes against your skin like a breeze through an open window at night. Overhead, stars scatter wide and unbothered, a quiet reminder that even gods and monsters are small against the stretch of eternity. You let your shoulders drop, tension slipping out of them as though you've been carrying those stories too long. You think back to Ariadne left on the shore, to Medea's fire, to Persephone's calm torchlight, to Cassandra whispering truths no one believed. Their voices linger, but softer now, as if they're no longer demanding attention but offering company. It's strange how tales that once felt like punishment now hum like lullabies, their edges dulled by the quiet of night. There's a comfort in knowing you've walked through their forgotten stories and come out the other side. You've carried their sorrow, glimpsed their power, and listened where others turned away. And now, as your body settles deeper into stillness, those voices are content to rest. The ground beneath you feels warm, as if you've sunk into the safest corner of the world. Your breath evens, slower now, steadier. The myths drift farther away, not vanishing, but folding themselves into the dark like pages of a book closing softly. For tonight, you don't need to remember every name, every betrayal, every tragedy. You just need the quiet assurance that stories, no matter how sharp, can also soothe, wrapping you in a fabric of time far older than your own. So let yourself sink. Let the hum of the night carry you. You are safe here, surrounded by echoes of gods and heroes who have long since faded, leaving behind only whispers for you to follow into sleep. And as your eyes grow heavy, hear this one last note, almost like a whisper against your ear: rest now, you're not alone, and you are held.